Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Open Minds podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Balkaran. Today we have Sylvain Charlebois, also known as the Food Professor, a prominent figure in the field of food distribution and policy, professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax, where Sylvain teaches in the faculties of management and agriculture. Additionally, Sylvain has served as the scientific director of the Canadian Agri-Food Foresight Institute, also located in Halifax. Sylvain's work has been published in over 500 peer-reviewed and scientific articles. Sylvain, thank you so much for joining the Open Minds podcast. Welcome. I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Christopher, for the invitation. Yeah, it's been a struggle to schedule a time for the both of us to meet, but we're finally meeting. So I'm looking forward to a nice chat with you.
That's right. Sylvain, I wanted to begin our conversation on the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't think enough Canadians know the impact of supply chains that the pandemic exacerbated or introduced. I'd like for us to start our conversation there, and we can kind of dovetail into some of the specific issues.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we often forget that the pandemic was a global event. And when a global event affects food systems, you're going to be paying for it for a long time. And what we've seen in recent months with the politicization of food inflation, as an example, people really only think about their own neighborhood, their own province, their own country. But in reality, I mean, the pandemic really impacted the entire world, and its impact is long lasting. We're still feeling it today. I mean, many regulations have changed as a result of the pandemic. And so I think that's been underappreciated quite a bit. Which is why on X I tend to post comparatives between countries, not just looking at Canada, so people can understand that struggles are real in Canada, but they're certainly significant elsewhere around the world. From farmers to consumers, the entire food supply chain was impacted in one way or another, whether it's related to foreign workers, struggles with supply chains, costs. It really just impacted the efficiency of everything. And when you impact the efficiency of everything, it tends to cost more. When the economy actually struggles to be efficient, it tends to cost more, including for the agri-food sector. And that's why there was that struggle. Of course, governments spent a tremendous amount of money to keep us safe, to implement new measures to make sure that we minimize the impact of the pandemic, but also that created another problem, which is inflation across the world. And that basically led to another problem. And of course, what really made things much worse. So we went from one black swan event to another, and the other black swan event, of course, was the invasion of Ukraine. And so COVID made things complicated and costly, and Ukraine really just hit input costs directly at the heart. So everything you bought as a food manufacturer increased immensely. And so that's why it took so long to recover. And I think we're actually pretty much at the tail end of what I would call a recovery cycle right now.
Sylvain, my parents just purchased a new vehicle and they're trying to get the second key fob. And the dealer called them and said there's actually a global shortage on key fobs. And this look of like wonderment just struck them. They're like, how could there be a global shortage on key fobs? Well, it turns out there's like a microchip shortage as a result of the pandemic, etc. I'd like for you to unpack why we're still feeling the impacts of the global pandemic, specifically when it comes to food, and what the policies during the global pandemic exacerbated the supply chain disruption.
Well, I mean, when it comes to supply chains, which is really my area of research, the one thing you want is predictability.
Yeah.
Nothing was predictable, like
Right.
nothing. And so markets were unpredictable, but policies were unpredictable too. I mean, governments were trying to figure this thing out. I mean, if you remember going back to March 2020, a lot of people thought, "Oh my goodness, this is really really challenging. This is really important, and this could be deadly." I mean, a lot of people were thinking about their own lives here, and so you had that. A lot of people were concerned, and of course, you had the empty shelves all over the world, not just in Canada, but all over the world, and people wondered, "Oh, is the world running out of food?" And of course, those as an academic, it was really the first time in 25 years I was actually getting very interesting questions about supply chains. I mean, really, when when do you answer a question about supply chains? You answer questions about, the new flavored bagel, or why, why chip bags are half empty, or
Yeah.
why is the price of beef going up? I mean, those are the kinds of things you get as a question, but you never get questions like, "Oh my goodness, there's an empty shelf here. What's going
Yeah.
on with truckers? What's happening with foreign workers impacting farm gate issues? And if you shut down a processing plant in Alberta, what happens next with distribution and retailing? And what about restaurants? And if restaurants are shut down, so what kind of pressure are we putting on retail?" I mean, those are all things I was, of course, obviously it was a pandemic, so you couldn't get excited about this, but I thought, wow, people are interested in knowing more about supply chain economics. So to me, it was this huge awakening, a global collective awakening around supply chain. So I was really, fortunate, I think, enough to really to have been in the middle of this educational path for Canadians mainly. I mean, I was giving interviews all over the world, but it was mainly in Canada, and I thought, wow, this is great. People want to learn more about the food industry, and to me, if people want to learn more about the food industry and understand where their food is coming from, they'll appreciate what farmers are doing. They'll appreciate what processors are. They'll appreciate all the work that comes with producing, distributing, retailing food. And so I was actually pretty I was quite pleased at the very beginning of the pandemic, but it didn't last, unfortunately.
Mm. Oh, that's too bad, Professor.
Yeah.
But Sylvain, I wanted to ask you, what were some of those initial questions like? Because I think there still is a demystification that needs to happen with not only the general public, but people within many sectors as well that just don't know the real risks that Canada and other countries have in their food supply.
Yeah, I mean, so when you look at food security, for example, so you have three pillars within food security. A lot of people use food security as a blanket sort of concept. So to me, food security includes access to food. It includes safe foods, so access to safe food, and of course, access to safe, affordable food. So those are the three pillars to me that are quite important. And of course, throughout the pandemic, we had conversation about all three of them, like all the time. And so at the beginning, it was about access, and then safety with the virus contaminating certain foods, and then of course later, 2 years later, because of Ukraine, affordability really became the topic,
Mm,
and it's still the case right now, and that's when food inflation got politicized and everything went back to normal in terms of people didn't care much about supply chains. They were caring more about blaming someone or blaming a company,
mhm,
pointing fingers at people. And that's so you heard things like boycotts and people not being not even trying to understand what was going on. So the first part of, I would say, the last 4 years, from 2022, it was really interesting. But the last couple of years to me have been incredibly disappointing in a way that
mm,
you saw a population, and again, you could blame media if you will, if you want. I don't. I mean, media's job is to be a reflection of society,
mhm.
basically. And but the interest was basically mostly on blaming a domestic company or domestic companies around greed, for example. And when I start hearing that, I don't know about you, Christopher, but I got to tell you, like seriously, at some point I thought many Canadians just forgot about why companies exist in the first place. I mean, so are we talking about a food economy without companies here? Is that what we're talking about? And if that's the case, then let's talk about let's talk about real issues then. Let's talk about the kind of food industry we want. But I must say, I mean, I have to admit, I'm a free marketer. I believe in market failures. I believe in the role of businesses, and I believe that they are a force for good. I mean, they can actually innovate and do better and do well, and enterprises need to exist. And it just I just think that they're often misunderstood.
And so, for those that may be less familiar, in the past few years here in Canada, the conversation on um, grocery companies, Loblaws, etc., have been that the CEOs are making so much money, food inflation, prices of food have gone up
But
exponentially.
Christopher, it's not just in Canada.
Correct.
It's you see the same kind of rhetoric in the United States. So I think again we're talking about a global phenomena here. So I was in June. I was in Berlin and Spain. Same rhetoric,
Hmm.
same rhetoric, and
Yeah.
prices actually didn't jump as much as here. So
Wow.
that
Interesting.
the will to understand kind of faded away, unfortunately, because politicians really recovered that phenomena to score political points, and that really didn't help.
And that's the sad part about public policy and politics. Politicians are always looking in the next election cycle, and public policy, I think, needs to be much more long term, outlasting governments for the sake of the public good. Um, Sylvain, why are you disappointed in how the conversation has dovetailed to greed? What should the conversation be focused on?
Well, I mean, I think the term or accusations were politically motivated because
Mm,
when you are having a conversation around profiteering, you need to be clear on intent. You need
right.
to be precise on what you mean by
Yes.
profiteering. Is it 2%? Is it
Hmm.
3%? Is it what are we talking about here? If we have a capitalistic system in which enterprises do exist and the main goal of an enterprise is to make a profit. So what is too much? And nobody, and I've actually asked accusers. Jagmeet Singh is one of them. I've actually had a
Hmm.
conversation with Jagmeet Singh,
Wow.
one on one. I think it was last year, asking him where's the line, where is the line, and
Hmm.
so where can we agree? And he was never able to draw a line. Why? Because he was politicizing the issue. So
Hmm.
I don't really mind if people actually think we need to nationalize food distribution in Canada. Fine. Let's talk about this. Okay. Let's talk about implications in doing so, though. If we think we need to cap profits, if we need to implement a windfall tax, fine. Let's talk about it. But let's be precise here and talk about uh, a policy in a way that we actually mean it, and not just, as you said, uh, and not just to play on theatrics or politics.
Sylvain, that's such an important point. I think it does such a great disservice to the real conversation we should be having. I'm curious in your conversation with Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party, for those that are less familiar, third party here in Canada. Um, what what did what was Jagmeet's response when you perhaps asked him what we should be focusing on instead of, going down the path of just making this binary, greedy CEOs getting money, when really there's issues affecting the food sector here in Canada,
Yeah.
and we're not talking about that.
Well, I mean, I remember. So first of all, he asked to meet with me through his director of research. So we were the three of us on Zoom. So I didn't meet him like face to face. It was over Zoom. I have a lot of respect for Jagmeet Singh, and frankly, I think he is a politician. So his goal is to get votes. So I get it. The challenge that I had with his approach was that it became a lightning rod, and frankly, his greedflation campaign actually worked. People bought into it, and so when I saw people buying into this, I thought, whoa, this is getting serious, and media bought into it. I mean, the Loblaw boycott, in my view, never really existed. It never really happened in the real world. It came out of Reddit, and Reddit, you can tell that there was 91,000 members, but because some people can actually be a member 100 times, 200 times, there were probably less than 1,000 involved. So it was very politically driven. And if you go, I mean, on Reddit, on the Loblaw is out of control page, you'll see my picture there. So I became a target because I never really I never saw any evidence of profiteering at all because nobody was clear about the definition itself. And that's kind of what I said to Jagmeet Singh. And I did say to him that overdoing it is quite dangerous because you'll get people to really behave in a irresponsible way. For example, with the Loblaw boycott, you probably heard that there was a underlying campaign encouraging people to steal food in stores, and that act itself is illegal. You cannot in Canada encourage someone to break the law, and so you could see that things were getting out of control here, and I received threats. I received a lot of really bad emails. My wife received bad emails. My son, I mean, it was just out of control for a while. So the Loblaw out of control campaign was out of control, and I think. And I think the intent at the beginning was genuine and honest. If you talk to the people who started the campaign, I think they were actually honest. They just wanted to talk, and they wanted to create a place for people to vent. But because of how the issue was politicized, and not just by Jagmeet Singh, by the way, you can blame certainly the Conservatives for doing the same thing. I mean, absolutely. I mean, the Conservatives actually did a lot of damage too. And I met with them as well. I met with John Barlow, the head of the Ag Critic in the Conservative caucus, and I did say, listen, your rhetoric about the carbon tax, your rhetoric about inflation, be careful, because right now, I mean, when you look at inflation right now, it's at 2.6%. It's actually within, I would say, a reasonable threshold. So be careful what you do, and so I think that I'm hoping that this summer people will take a somber look at the numbers, the data, and say, listen, maybe it's time to move on here.
Sylvain, I want to explore this further because I imagine there's a listener out there who hasn't seen their paycheck go up, and the same cost of basket of goods at, No Frills, Metro, Loblaws, wherever, is much higher than it was just a few years ago, even last year, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So they're seeing the food inflation every week where they're providing for their family, and they're also seeing the reports of CEOs making record profits. So they put two and two together and say, there's inflation happening. My take-home pay is not increased. There's a devaluation happening of my money. I'm paying more at the grocery store, and by the way, the CEO is making a lot more money.
Yeah.
In their mind, they're piecing this together, and they're seeing the anger that the politicians are putting together, scoring political points. Yes. Why do you think that's an incorrect way of viewing the real issue here when it comes to food, the food sector itself?
Well, I mean, part of it is correct, actually, because, I mean, grocers aren't blameless here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's be honest. I mean, $22 million for Per Bank, the new CEO of Loblaw. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, a huge signing bonus of $10 million.
Oof.
I've always had issues with bonuses given to executives when when a lot of people out there are really struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the bread cartel story, the Hero Pay disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. I mean, they've made some really bad mistakes. Loblaw wanting to end the 50% discount on perishable products.
Right.
We outed Loblaw because we did get a confirmation from Loblaw, and they never actually made an announcement because they knew that they were going to be attacked.
Mm.
And I actually criticized them for that. You need to tell people what's going on here, and I told them, and then they actually changed their minds. I mean, so grocers do deserve some criticism here. I mean, let's face it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, but at the same time, we also need to understand that the grocery business is not an easy business either. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a tough business. So you have the big five. All big five companies are well managed companies, but right now, I would say it's pretty easy. It's they're coasting right now, and that's
Mm.
why I've always been a huge advocate of the code of conduct, because we need to disrupt the coziness that we see within the uh, grocery landscape in Canada. So I would say on the one side, I say, well, it's too bad that we politicize for inflation, but on the other, I kind of understand why people are upset, because grocers really gave them good reasons to be upset.
Sylvain, you mentioned that the grocery business is not an easy business. For many, they're less aware of the business model. They're less aware of how challenging it is.
Yep.
Can you explain for many what those challenges are and how not easy that business is?
So, I mean, in a nutshell, what's different between the grocery business and any other businesses is that the grocery business is really essentially a low margin, high volume business.
Hmm.
Okay. So it may sound okay. So what? Well, so what? It means that if you want to make money, you got to carry 20,000 SKUs, and you got to
Wow.
manage all those SKUs and make sure that your shelves are replenished, that you actually deal with, I don't know, 10,000, 12,000 different suppliers.
Wow.
And many of them carry perishable food with cold chains to manage. So you're basically thinking of harvesting lettuce in California, and 2 days later it's sold in Toronto, Ontario. I mean, it's complicated, and you're always one recall away from losing money in one SKU. You're always one disaster away of seeing your brand being tarnished. Talk to Loblaw about it. I mean, there's been so many moments where grocers were criticized. They're exposed. I mean, they're exposed. People think that the food industry stops at the grocery store. That's it. A lot of them do, and so that pressure is real. Now,
Hmm.
not all grocers are using the same model. So you have, I would say, Loblaw, Sobeys, and Metro. They're in that same boat of being a grocer, a traditional grocer. But Walmart and Costco are different. So Walmart is a global company. It's the largest retailer in the world. Logistics are absolutely phenomenal with Walmart, and they became grocers not by default, but uh, because they wanted to create habits, and now food is absolutely a priority for all stores. So they only build super centers in Canada, where 50% of the store itself carries food. So they're committed to
Hmm.
food. Costco is another different model. That's 4,000 SKUs, 15%. So when you go to Costco and you
Hmm.
buy something, they make 15%, and that 50% is used to pay real estate, taxes, salaries, and they pay their employees very well at Costco. You can make a career out of working at Costco. You got two loss leaders in front of the house. You got the hot dogs at $1.50. It's been like that since 1985. And in the
Wow.
back, you got the rotary seat chicken at $7.99. And in the middle, you got a bunch of things. You buy in bulk. You need to be a member. Costco does not make any money except when selling memberships. So it made $7 billion last year. And that was generated from sales, membership sales. That's the model right there. It's an incredible company, but it is different.
Wow, that is so interesting. And so grocery, the business, it lends itself to big companies that can take big losses because the independent grocer just can't.
That's right. So when you think about like a Costco, for example, it's just a box, really. And when you think about it, Costco is a bank, really. I mean,
Hmm.
because it's a box that carries merchandise financed by suppliers.
Right.
So with Loblaw, Metro, and Sobeys, it's a bit different. They finance some of it. They try to delay payments to 90 days, for example. And so they move products, but every vertical has a different dynamic.
Hmm.
And so it's complicated. So you need a bunch of people who know their margins, who know their suppliers, and of course, over the years, what has happened in Canada, frankly, is that grocers have become masters at uh, controlling the supply chain. They have tremendous power, and I would argue too much power. And that's why I think the code of conduct will create this level playing field that would allow suppliers to actually, cut through that power noise to and have a chance to actually make money selling to Canadians.
Sylvain, that reminds me of a quote I read somewhere that said, McDonald's isn't in the fast food business, it's in the real estate business. They buy up
Oh, it's
all,
true.
right? They buy up the exit off the interstate to put up the M sign.
Yep.
That they buy up that prime real estate. Fast food is secondary,
So the
which is
core
very interesting.
competency for McDonald's is you're absolutely right, Christopher. It's real estate. What's the core competency for Walmart? Logistics.
Hmm.
That's how they make money. What's the core competency for Costco? Cash flow.
Hmm.
Cash flow. That's how they make their money. So when you look at a company, you have to think, okay, what's actually making that? What's the core competency of Loblaw? President's choice.
Wow.
So that private label drives everything,
Hmm.
everything in that company.
Wow.
Loblaw's head office is located at one President's choice. That tells you everything.
Wow. Wow. This is really interesting. We need to do a separate conversation on the business models because I think a lot of people would be interested to know that because it's
But I
fascinating.
would say that Loblaw owns the most efficient food innovation supercluster in the country with President's Choice. When you think about building a brand like President's Choice, you got to think about the network. So the companies that will support the brand. I mean, think about it. You need a network of companies that supports a brand they don't own. I mean, think of
Right.
the power. I
Right.
mean, so so when you think about Loblaw, you can't think about Loblaw the way you think about Sobeys, for example, because
Correct.
Loblaw is a corporate model. It owns all of its stores. So when it's time to implement, say, I don't know, if they want to sell President's Choice cookies in 5,000 stores, they can do it like in an instant. Sobeys, Metro, they can't because a
Hmm.
lot of the stores are independently owned by families. And so the way you negotiate with franchises is very different than when you actually own the stores. And so when you execute in terms of supporting your own brand, President's Choice or No Name, it's much more efficient. And that's why Loblaw is far, far ahead of everyone else when it comes to private labeling in Canada.
And it seems like they've created a moat and very insular. No one can seemingly touch them other than a potential Costco coming in to Canada.
Absolutely. And Costco, I mean, Loblaw owns well over 5,000 stores. Costco owns and operates 109. Okay.
Wow.
And Costco will take, so my bet is that the next store that they'll build will be in Surrey, BC. Okay. Number 110. I'd say that number 111 will probably take a few years. It probably will be in the GTA, but they take a long time in planning, a real long time. They're very careful, very meticulous. It's a very different. Whereas Loblaw will look at land, they will look at size. Right now, they're opening up smaller, no frill stores, for example, to accommodate a more urban centric market. So they can explore all these things. That's what they do. Costco doesn't do that. It builds boxes. You build a Costco in 14 weeks. To build a Loblaw store will take you about 3 to 4 months.
Sylvain, very interesting point. I live in downtown Toronto, and 2 boutique no frills opened up within walking distance to me. So
Did you go in?
I did, yeah.
And
they are so busy because where I live, there's a big metro, and metro gets everyone in my area going there. But the no frills now has come to town, and man, I would like to think that I live in a nicer part of the city, and it doesn't matter. There are very wealthy people I know that go to no frills and will buy their groceries, no shame at all. We'll park the Bentley out front and go right into no frills because people are everyone's looking for a deal, right? And the no frills too. I mean, they've really incorporated them into the community. It doesn't feel like a no frills when you go in. It feels like
I saw
in the
pictures,
community.
and to be honest, I felt the same. It didn't feel like a no frills. It felt like a mixture between farm boy and no frills.
Like an independent grocer
I know.
inside your community.
So you can explore, like a Loblaw can do that. It can pilot and explore and test. Costco doesn't do that. It just doesn't. Costco never brags. Do you know what the advertising budget of Costco is?
No idea. Wow.
Zero. Have you ever seen an ad of Costco?
I've only word of mouth through my friends. Do I know about their MasterCard?
We've seen Galen Weston on TV countless times, too many times. But Costco doesn't brag about anything, doesn't send out press releases. They just do it.
Wow. That membership model.
Yep.
So, Sylvain, you mentioned, 10,000, 20,000 SKUs. So a disruption to any one of those SKUs can really set things out of whack. So coming back to the pandemic, when everything was kind of out of whack, grocers were really feeling it. But one thing that you mentioned on a podcast, which I found interesting, is that the food waste and the impact during the pandemic was great. We actually suspect that the average households generate 13.5% more food waste in the first 4 months of the pandemic. That's about $400 of food per household.
Yep.
I wanted to explore that further. Initially, there was so much food waste because we just didn't know what was going to happen. Is that the reason why there was so much initial food waste from households?
I'd say, I mean, it was a messy time. I mean, a lot of people were trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, we actually literally shut down a $90 billion sector in Canada, which is food service, overnight. I mean, all that demand went from one sector to another. I mean, it was just overwhelming so people actually kind of lost their bearings when it came to retail. I would say we didn't realize it, but that's really what was going on. I mean, 39% of your money is typically spent at the restaurant. That's basically, so the split is 61-39. So it went down to basically 91 9 in March and April of 2020. So people overbought. Of course, they overbought. They bought too much food. So now I think that split is again back to, I would say, probably 35-65, because I mean the food inflation issue really is keeping people away from restaurants. But generally speaking, I think we're almost back to normal in a way.
Why did it take so long for things to come back to normal? It's been almost 4.5 years now.
Yeah.
Can you explain to folks why it's taken this long for the food sector to come back?
Well, I mean, when you look at the data, I mean, the food sector has come back really,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually look at the data. I actually think that things are way more normal than what people think. People are still feeling the burden. The the issue that we have right now when it comes to food affordability is the fact that people have less money to spend on food. I mean, that's basically what's going on. So people are looking at higher prices, but now they're not. I mean, some categories are cheaper than on January 1st. I just think that interest rates really hit a lot of people hard. When you think about debt and mortgages and things like that, I mean, it affects most people. And so my guess is that when people show up at the grocery store, they had less money to spend on food, and they just traded down, and they figured that a lot of food that they used to buy they couldn't buy anymore, and that led to more frustration, and it led to the campaigns that we saw in terms of boycotting grocers and all that. So the frustration that I saw was I think was real. It was a bit the reasons, the rationale to justify the frustrations, I think was misguided.
Yeah.
I actually think that it wasn't just about food prices. There was more to it than that.
I'd like to explore that further, Sylvain. What other factors were influencing in addition to food prices?
Well, I mean, so one, you have a lot of people who do have a mortgage, and will have a variable rate. Worse, many people actually had fixed payments with a variable rate. So, and now we're 4 years after the pandemic, and you remember what happened soon after the pandemic started. People started to move everywhere. They started to leave the city. And they and they bought they bought property. And when you buy property, you need a mortgage, and you typically negotiate a 3-year term or a 5-year term. The vast majority of mortgage agreements are either 3 or 5 years, and that's what we're in the middle of that right now. We're in I guess we're in year 5 now, and I would say that the next 6 months to 12 months is going to be are going to be extremely difficult for a large number of people, because they will see their payments go up, and so we're not out of the woods yet. So that's why I'm hoping that this week the Bank of Canada will actually have some good news. I think it will, and that will actually lessen the burden on and that's even more good news than lower prices. It will actually give some breathing room to more people.
I remember back in 2021, interest rates were 1.75% on a 5-year fixed mortgage, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
people were, snatching up as many properties as they could. And you're right, it is, it's hard to smile about that because that's real pain for people, and
Oh, absolutely. And
people are
that's why
walking away
I've
from.
tried to sympathize. But I must say, I mean, a lot of things, like what really bothered me for a while was to see on social media people just taking pictures of overpriced food.
Hmm.
I just didn't understand what the goal was. I mean, is your goal to get clicks and new followers and get
Mhm.
people riled up? That's fine, but you often saw evidence that weren't necessarily clear in the picture. For example, I saw, the five breasts of chicken last year. A CTV reporter took that picture, $39 for 5 chicken breasts, but um, the report never mentioned that it was free range and organic as well. I mean, you're gonna pay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
context was often missing in those pictures. So I kind of started to do the reverse. Instead of actually taking pictures of overpriced product, you start taking pictures of products that are super cheap and good deals.
Yeah.
Just to show people that there is hope. The consumers have more power than they think. Because when you walk away from an overpriced product, you're voting. You're sending a message saying that this is not acceptable. This is not something we need right now. And I always remember the $9 cauliflower crisis a few years ago. I was getting calls. Oh my God, my goodness, why is cauliflower $9? Well, Canadian dollar actually tanked 10 cents in 1 month. So obviously, cauliflower coming from the U.S. went up. And I basically said, listen, do you really need cauliflower right now? I mean, don't buy it. Just don't buy it. Go
Yeah.
for something else
Yes.
in the store.
Yes.
And guess what happened? The following week, cauliflower was back at $152 a pop.
Wow.
So consumers have more power than they think. It's just
And
they forgot about that.
outrage media, Sylvain, it sells, right? So if I go to a First Nations reserve and I see, Coca-Cola for $17.99, right? I'm gonna post that on my Insta story, and I know it's gonna take off, right?
Oh
People
yeah, no,
will be like,
absolutely.
right? They'll be like, oh, they're purposely trying to keep, the community down.
That's right.
Sylvain, in our time remaining, I want to talk about the Ukraine-Russia war.
Yes.
I specifically want to talk about the disruptions in grain exports, because one thing that I've been following has been Canada is a great supplier to the world of grain. And since the Ukraine war, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but our grain is being prevented from going to Africa? Do I follow this correctly? Is that what's happening because of the embargo on Russia? Is that what's happening, or is that not right?
I honestly, I haven't really followed recent developments in that regards. Something may have changed, but you got to understand that when you think about Russia and Ukraine, you have to think about wheat mainly. And wheat is 20% of all calories consumed on Earth.
Right.
Wheat matters a lot. So as soon as something happens to wheat, whether it's an embargo on Russia or by Russia, because they actually do that sometimes, it changes shift. I mean, Russia has a lot of influence on because it's the largest exporter of wheat in the world by far.
Right.
And so you will see the entire world position itself either for or against Russia. So depending of what's going on with grain prices right now, wheat prices are actually quite low. So it matters less, but wheat prices actually go higher. And sometimes actually countries like Russia will want to bring the price of a bushel of wheat higher. So you'll see really governments like the Putin government really plays around with markets in that way because they understands the power it has, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, going back to Ukraine, I mean, it's pretty clear when you look at the data that the war has impacted Ukraine's agriculture. There's no doubt, and so, and frankly, it was by design, and Russia is likely pleased about that because it actually gained more influence as a result of Ukraine's fall, especially when it comes to wheat. Now,
Right.
Canada as a supplier, in my view, is doing fairly well. If it can't find a market, say in Africa, it will find a market somewhere. So we're doing very well export wise, to be honest. And so we're feeling, could we do better? Of course we can, but we're doing fairly well last few years. I've always said despite ourselves, but really, I mean, we could do better for sure. But we've done well overall. Right now, my biggest preoccupation when it comes to food geopolitics, because that's kind of what we're talking about here, is what's going on between China and the United States.
Hmm.
So China bought a lot of commodities from the U.S., but not this year. They're starting to buy from Brazil to undermine the United States. So that's why, and so there's a lot of dynamics going on there, especially when it comes to China. So um, the American election this year is going to be pretty significant
Yeah.
for food geopolitics. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And so, depending on who's going to win the White House and Congress, takes control, which party takes control of Congress, it's going to matter a great deal when it comes to geopolitics. And I don't want to speculate as to which choice will do what, but
Yes.
I would say that styles are going to be very different, and so outcomes are going to be very different too.
In many ways, it's like saber rattling a little bit, right? Like these major powers, if you have a party um, that's openly declared not war on China, but a reticence to embrace China, um, you can see the country explore other options outside the United States because they have the luxury to do so.
Yeah.
And places a lot of real pressure on both parties to start singing in many ways homogenizing the differences and saying to each other, you want your economy to flourish and you can't afford a foe in China when it comes to this.
Well, China's food security, as you know, is a priority for the country. I mean, the things that they're doing right now is incredibly impressive. I mean, they're actually building hog barns that are 27 stories high.
Wow.
I mean, it's just to actually manufacture 1 million hogs a year, and so I mean, with an organized economy, you can do a lot of things. It's a centralized economy; you can do a lot of different things. And China is really moving along and becoming more and more food sovereign, which is really
Hmm.
impacting America's ability to influence the world. And so America has kind of had will actually we'll have to find ways to be more influential when it comes to ag economies, and that's why there's a lot of focus on oil right now because America feels it could actually be more influential than OPEC and other regions of the world, including Canada. And so it's all about influence and controlling market conditions. If you can grow all the commodities you want in the world, but if you don't have farmers are price takers, so if you can't really have a say in terms of how much a bushel of wheat should be negotiated at, I mean it's really not great for your agriculture, and agriculture is really at the basis of any nation's economy.
Sylvain, you have mentioned when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war that the worst is yet to come, specifically with regards to the implications of the disruptions to food prices and supply chains and the availability of food globally, specifically the reduction in the availability of grain due to reduced supply. For those that are questioning what you mean, what do you see as the worst being yet to come, and what do you foresee as some of the big challenges?
When it comes to Ukraine specifically, or just in
Correct.
general?
Yeah, in Ukraine specifically, and then as well in general.
um I'm concerned about food geopolitics. I mean, I do believe that we'll continue to see more dictators like President Putin um, weaponizing food.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what happened with Ukraine, and I think that's the latest case study we've had. We've seen this many times. We've seen this playbook many times. Um, and I think it just is just such an attractive proposition for tyrants.
Hmm.
You can hurt a lot of people very quickly. I mean, Canada got hurt with Ukraine indirectly, but we only had to cope with an 11% inflation rate.
Hmm.
But you see lineups at the food bank, and
Hmm.
this is Canada, one of the
Yeah.
richest countries in the world. Can you imagine in Uganda what's going on, or South Africa, or other places? I mean, it's been tough. So I think that a lot of people have paid attention, and frankly, I'm concerned. I'm just concerned that there'll be more of these things moving forward, which is why I think discussions around NATO and world security uh, and um, and how to make sure that some of these countries are made accountable are really important discussions right now. And frankly, like, I think Canada can do and should be doing more. And because when you see summits like NATO, of course, a lot of people think about national defense and making sure that all countries are protected. But the way I see it is that we need to make sure that we protect, water, our water, and food, and our ability to produce food, essentially. And so, to me, those are really big issues, and they're going to become bigger because of what's going on with the Arctic, because of the melting of because I mean, Canada is going to become more complicated to defend. I mean, because we got a lot to defend, and with no capacity to defend it.
That is so interesting. That Canada's going to be more
Russia is
complicated.
our neighbor.
People don't want to know that.
if you look
Right?
up that globe,
Yeah.
Russia's our neighbor. Yeah, I was in the military. I was in the Air Force for 5 years, and let me tell you, I mean, the information is, or at least was classified in those days. But I got to tell you, I mean, there's lots of activity up there, and we have no access to it. A lot of foreign activity in our own waters, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Because we don't have the capacity. We don't have the...
People freak out with nuclear subs, so we don't buy them, and then we move on.
There's something to be said about the will of the Canadian people. I struggle with that often because
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, people are focused. I mean, when you have a very urban centric electorate, it becomes more difficult to make them more globally aware. I've actually taught in China. I've taught in the U.S. And I must say that Canadians are typically more globally aware than the typical Western, well, North American, if you will. But I taught in Europe, and let me tell you, these people are really, really globally aware. They understand, because Europe is complicated, right? Europe is really complicated. When it comes to food policy, it's a mess. In America, in North America, it's the US and the two other misfits. We just follow. And so our policies are based on what the people are doing down south, basically. We either go with them or we go against them. And if we go against them, then of course some problems come. But we mostly actually went along with the Americans most of the time, and that is becoming a problem. I'm sorry, but it's because of what's going on with their democracy, because of what's going on with some of their being an ally of the United States is becoming a problem for Canada. So we got a lot of work to do.
And it doesn't help that there's oceans separating us from parts of the world, but there's real opportunity, I think, for Canada as well, with leaders that are thinking longer term.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not, I mean, politics are politics. I mean, let's face it. And but I am concerned about some of the priorities that we have as a nation, for sure. And we tend to take food systems for granted, even though we don't. We say we're not. It's very important. We take care of our farmers. But do we really understand farmers? Are we trying to understand farmers? Are we trying to understand food policy, really? I'm not convinced.
Professor, I'd like you to, in our last few minutes together, entertain a thought experiment with me. You mentioned a 27-story bovine farm in China making 1 million hogs a year. Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, you can look up, there are some pictures of these barns. It's really impressive. And frankly, I wouldn't want to work on the first floor.
That saying that shit rolls downhill has real meaning there, eh? um, so you have that happening in China. They're doing incredible innovation in their sector. Um, you have Russia in the north, getting into Canadian waters, getting into Canadian territory. We do not have the capacity to defend the north. And we see in both countries centralization of power, centralization of authority. That's how they run their government, because their government is less concerned about a political cycle.
Yep.
They're more concerned about the state of their country, well after they're 6 feet under. Do you think that our politics in Western democracy is actually undermining our ability to think well into the future? Because all we're focused on in the United States, all they're focused on is the midterms. In 2 years, whomever gets in November, they're focused, laser-like focused in 2 years. And then that's it. Then after that, it's like, okay, election mode. And then if I get a second term, I'm kicking my feet up. I did what I could. The rest is up to that focus gets people completely away from the idea of food security, of building industries that protect the country for the long term. And I don't know, I think our politics is actually undermining our civilization.
Oh, it's quite possible. It's honestly beyond my own expertise
Yeah.
as a food distribution, but I think it is a very interesting question we should ask ourselves. I mean, I'm a believer in democracy, but I'm also a believer in science, and I must say, because with good science you have strong policy. I've always believed that the two go together, and what I'm seeing right now are governments weaponizing science. I mean, they basically are treating science like a buffet.
Hmm.
I want this, but I don't want that. Science is not an absolute. You don't pick, you know, a study to support a narrative. That's not how science work. So
Mm-hmm.
my hope, to kind of answer your question directly, I guess, is to, you know, if we are to believe in democracy, we also need to believe in the role of science supporting sound policy and democracy eventually.
Wow, that's such a fascinating. You don't pick science to choose the narrative, and yet I would say that there is a politicization happening in research, even. Um,
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. Oh, and it's a problem. I mean, on campuses, yeah, some of the discourse is just really alarming. And so there's the left and the right. That's the classic way of seeing things. And I must say, like right now, it's very left leaning on campuses. And if you dare say that businesses are part of the solution, oh my goodness, you're
yeah,
sold to the devil. You shouldn't be an academic. And it's like the well, in Canada, you had the Conservative versus the Liberal and NDP. I mean, when's the last time you saw an academic running for office as a Conservative? It
yeah,
just doesn't happen. And why? Because it's very risky. Uh, Career-wise, if you actually run for office as a Conservative and you don't win, your career is over.
yeah,
But as a Liberal or NDP, it's more acceptable. It's more acceptable. It's because colleagues, you know, go into the field of research to save the world from itself, and and so um, and again, there's nothing wrong in thinking like that. There's nothing wrong in communism and different ways of seeing the world, but science is about debates. And right now, I'm seeing fewer and fewer actual debates. I only see colleagues working with like-minded people.
And that noble pursuit of science, of research, is being co-opted, because sometimes I talk to researchers on this podcast and I wonder sometimes, am I getting what their true opinion is, or what's getting them their next research grant, right? And so
Listen,
it's
Christopher, I'm often asked on stage, even, if academic freedom exists, and then
wow,
my answer is always this: academic freedom exists as long as you fit in,
wow,
and I
that
mean that.
that's that's scary, Professor. That really is, because that tells me that, as we've just discussed, as I've just hypothesized, if we are focused only on the next 2 to 4 years in the political cycle,
Yep.
then if our research is also focused on the next 2 to 4 years in our political cycle, everything aligns with a political doctrine, not the pursuit of something beyond.
So, again, back to your very important question about democracy, I think that is what is keeping me up at night, for sure. And so when I talk to you, I'm being as honest as possible, and I'm not filtering anything. But on campus, I do filter. I do. Yeah.
And Sylvain, I hope it's conversations like this that gets us back to a place of equilibrium. Because one thing I'm noticing from my friends on the left and the right is people are shocked and amazed when we have truly curious questions. And we're asking questions that, kind of get to the heart of the matter, but also dismantle what we think are how the world operates.
Yep.
And I think the podcast, that's the platform to do that, and to get people asking those questions openly instead
Yeah.
of hiding and retreating, because that you do that enough times and suddenly nobody knows what your opinion is, nobody knows where you stand on things, nobody knows who you are. Your research isn't what question you truly want to ask, because you're focused on something that is not what you may necessarily be asking a question on, agree with, etc. So
Absolutely.
this is so interesting, Sylvain. I am so excited for our future conversations, because I think we've covered a lot here. But
That beyond a lot beyond food even.
yes, definitely. I would love to invite you back on to talk more about Ukraine, Russia, and specifically, there's things that we want to chat about, fertilizer prices and how that has been
Oh,
impacted.
tons to talk about for sure.
So
Yeah.
thanks again, Sylvain. I will leave links below to your podcast and to all your research. I think it's amazing what you're doing. Thanks for asking these questions and doing it on a public forum. I'm going to keep doing the same, and I'm looking forward to our paths crossing again.
Take care, Christopher.